strategies in business for a world in flux. In this next season, I am predominantly focusing on the women in my community, particularly the ecological community, but there are other sectors, and how they have navigated their way in life, some up and down and others in a remarkably direct way, and how that maybe differs from the way our male counterparts have operated in business. I hope you enjoy these strategies and their journeys throughout life. Welcome. Hi and welcome. I'm Samantha, and today we are here with Dr. Roberta Marcoli, who is originally from Italy but does live in Australia. And she is going to be helping discuss or extend this discussion on farmed fish, because whether we realize it or not, we are more and more in our dietary choices, particularly if we wish to eat fish, being exposed to farmed fish and knowing how to choose them, why you might choose one over another. These are all aspects of Dr. Marcoli's work, and I think it's a pretty interesting topic and one that will become more and more prevalent because the world because the ocean is getting less and less fish in it in a lot of parts of the world that rely predominantly on fish. A lot of people think of the Asian countries, nearly all the Asian countries are heavily fish dependent. So, and even I still see on Instagram when I make comment on them, like in Italy or somewhere, this, vast tables burgeoning with seafood. And I'm always thinking, where are they getting that from? Like if you go to the Mediterranean, it's empty. So Dr. Marcoli is going to talk a little bit about herself, but she is from a background of genetics, a geneticist, and in aquaculture. And she started off, she's Italian, with that I am like Marcoli. Yeah. And she had then went over to New Zealand and has now ended up in the barramundi industry in Queensland. So from that point, we're going to say welcome. And if you would like to extend on what I've spoken about and talk maybe a little bit about the area of fish that you are working on, because I did listen to a podcast prior to this and you were speaking about grey flesh in barramundi, and people buy white, they think grey is bad. So what can we do about white? So I'm sure that's where your area of genetics is working on from an economics point of view.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Samantha. It was fantastic to meet you at Evoke. And I love the fact that we are now here having a chat on your podcast. My name is Roberta Marcoli, and I am an aquaculture scientist and geneticist by trade. But I like to start with my purpose. So when I talk about what I do, I like to remind myself my why. So my why is that I really want to see a thriving ocean and leave to the next generation an ocean that is even more thriving to the one that I found, but at the same time feed a third of the global population. Because when we look at the data, actually a third of the global population relies on seafood and proteins that come from the water as primary protein source and economic. So that's a big number when we think about it. It's huge. And so how do I pursue my why is by working in different things. One of it is as an aquaculture scientist, and then I work as well as a communication lead with Women in Seafood to help the industry thrive and the workforce getting the skills that they need to have a thriving industry. So when we think about the barramundi industry, I think here in Australia, is an iconic fish, has been caught for years, and now it's a very important aquaculture species all through Queensland, Northern Territory, and even Melbourne. In Werribee, we have, a fantastic recirculating aquaculture system at Mainstream where we farm a lot of those barramundi. But we have this issue with the grain in the fillets. So, and I think it's very interesting because the industry could have gone in different ways about it. We could have, educate the customers that grain in the fillet is actually nothing wrong with it. It's not that it's not fresh or anything. But the industry...
Is it just part of the species? Because you didn't actually elaborate on that. Is it part of the species colouring? It's just what it is?
Yeah. So I suppose I don't have the data to say that it's just in the farmed barramundi. Normally when you look at the barramundi, you have this little bit of darkness on the top half of the fillet. Now, people normally say that is associated with farmed barramundi. I'm not certain that that's a reality because I've seen it in also wild caught barramundi having that bit of a grayness. And when we look at the science, it's melanin. It's nothing wrong with it. What it means is that, you know, the little cells that when we get tanned, we are a little bit darker skin. Well, that's melanin cells. And what we have is that barramundi has some melanin cells deeper in the fillet. So it's just melanin. It's
Is it a
something
deep sea
natural.
fish, or is it one that sits a lot up near the surface that it would
It
be
sits quite
getting
close.
affected by the sun?
Yeah,
Sorry?
it's quite close to the surface. I mean, it can
Right.
swim up and down. Like it doesn't just stay on the surface, but it's not a deep sea. No, definitely not. Um, and the interesting thing is that we have found some barramundi that have a different coloration in the skin. So normally barramundi, the normal one that you found is that silver bronze coloration, but 1 every 12 million, which is so interesting. 1 every 12 million is born as wild caught, but turns golden. And when I say golden, I mean pure, beautiful golden barramundi. And if you find it, you hit the jackpot because that individual is worth almost 10,000 USD dollars for the aquarium
Wow.
industry. However, a very brave, I must say, person decided to fillet one of these $10,000 barramundi and found that the fillet is completely white. What does it mean is that if we can find the genetic and understand why these animals are golden and why they turn golden, and so they have less of that melanin, in the fillet, we can find a solution for the industry and find a way to have whiter flesh.
All of them.
Yeah, whiter flesh. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do, isn't it? We breed animals to suit the
Absolutely.
captivity and the market, what it wants in
Absolutely.
all of that. So I noticed that your passion when we pre-talking about doing this is preserving the ocean because the ocean is being overfished. And one of my podcast guests, David Carter, who you also know,
Yeah.
he's very pro us sustainably fishing wild caught. And in fact, his work with Greenpeace has helped increase our wild fish populations. Like the minke whale is up to 3,000 now from being almost extinct. And he's done tremendous things. And I think that people don't realize how much supporting the right company, and I'm not saying
Absolutely.
government, because I don't think government really has got it on their agenda. I mean, even when you and I were at a VOCAG where we met, we're sitting in a conference in one of the webinars, and there was, I think there was nothing else on there, and there was maybe 20 of us in the room, and yet there's 1,000 or something in the big rooms, talking about stuff that I've heard a million times. So I've been following this aquaculture, particularly aquaculture, since about 99 was the first
Yeah, incredible.
organic agricultural thing I went to in not Montreal, in Vancouver Island. And I happened upon one of those tiny planaries with 6 people in them. And they were talking all about just studying fish behavior in tanks and how they get stressed at certain numbers. And so I mean, that's now 25, 26 years ago. I imagine it's come leaps and bounds since then. But I then watched a documentary on the wild salmon farming,
Mm-hmm.
and how bad it was and how polluted the water was and how it was killing the wild fish up in those incredibly pristine waters up there in the Alaskan fisheries, and how they were hiding it from the World Health Organization. And it was actually even in store-bought supermarket, that's the bacteria that fish have actually get worse on us, not better. Like they're opposite of how we see them. And it was a huge eye opener to me. And I've sent that documentary to many, many people. And I keep asking, so where are we? This is a long time ago. This was like, early 2000s. And we're now, 20 years along. And I keep asking, so where are we up to now? Because I hear stuff about, JBS down in Tasmania, which is a known, it used to be, what is it called? Huon Valley? I'm actually not sure what is the name of the fish farming down there, that we've got a very famous salmon farming. We tend to, certainly Victoria, we get a lot of our salmon from there. And yet I'm regularly hearing things on social media, like I posted to you, about the incredible overdosing of antibiotics and obviously climate change affecting water. Well, the business is trying to keep itself afloat. So it's doing things that I would consider well, you should shut the thing down rather than do, polluting everything to be able to stay afloat. So I'm really interested to hear your viewpoint from inside the industry as to what has happened from a genetics point of view to alleviate the stress of the animals with climate change and the monoculturing of any species in a captive situation. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, sure. I feel like there has been a lot of comments that I would like to tap on. So the first one, it was that the ocean, it's hasn't had lots of fish. Now, I think that is very important that we talk about different regions. Like when we're talking about the Australian seafood and the Australian wild caught, it's highly regulated. So I personally, if I need to eat fish and I know that it's caught in Australia and is certified, I agree 100%. I'm pro fishing that is regulated, that is sustainable, and that is, looking after the environment, because at the end of the day, fishers want a thriving ocean. Fishers that are responsible want a thriving ocean. And I believe in the Australian seafood and in the Australian fishers. So that's my first point that I would like to highlight, is that not all the fisheries and not all the ocean are the same. Obviously, when
I think it's really hard for us because we have a tiny population, a massive landmass, and people may not realize we've got the third largest continental shelf in the world for wild fish to populate and do well in, and other countries simply don't have that and don't have the access to the wild fish that we do. We've got huge numbers of fish we don't use or tap into even when we export. In fact, the fisheries are struggling to get markets to understand just how much it is, and something like 70% of our fish that we as Australians eat is frozen from, because it's cheap.
Yes.
Because it isn't sustainably managed and it isn't regulated and it isn't all those things. So I think those points are really important to add into what you're saying about
absolutely
why it's a little difficult for us as Australians to really get that concept. But for those people in my audience that are not from Australia and don't have regulation around seafood, maybe have never even thought about it, it's really worth looking about how you can source in your local area. I mean, America, for instance, has massive seafood around its continental shelf. I think it's the largest, isn't it? I'm not really sure which is the largest continental shelf for fish, wild fish. You'd know more than I do.
Not very sure, sorry.
Oh, well.
Not sure, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like what you're saying is so important because it touches onto the responsibility of the consumer. Like, I think that consumers has a massive responsibility in choosing where they want to go and where they want the industry to go. So if we all collectively decide that we want sustainable and we do not want to eat this seafood that comes from uncertified or from imported seafood that we don't know even perhaps what is the species sometimes, it's our responsibility to make a choice. And by making choices, we are empowered to choose where the industry is going to go. And I always use the example of the chickens. So a few years ago, I remember as a student, I could not afford free-range chicken. I could not afford it. Now, I cannot find chicken that is not certified free range, pretty much, and the price has gone down. Why? Because everybody started thinking, well, I believe that free range chicken is important. Therefore, I'm going to start buying free range, and more people started buying free range, and less the price of free range was because.
Yeah, but I have to say on this point, because agriculture is my area of expertise, that no meat-eating chickens have ever been grown in Australia in a non-free-ranging manner. They're not in cages. The cages are only in egg areas, not in bird areas. So chickens run around in the bird area thing. They might be dense, but they, whether they get access to outside, mostly because they are a highly predated bird from eagles and things from above, they tend to stay under trees, under cover. They don't, even when access to outside, they don't like going outside. So it's a little bit of a difficult one, that free range, because you can get, it's certified, it's stayed inside something and it ran around, but there's quite a big difference between, you're probably talking about a bird that you can buy for $5 or $6 and another one that's 20. So primarily that's actually going to be access to food and whether they've got mobile pens, they're moving over grass, which means a lot more labour intensive. So they're actually the biggest differences that will be the cost factor, is the food and the labour in it.
Absolutely. But now, people know about free range. And so I think, or having better welfare. And I believe in that because people are more passionate about where it comes from. And I really hope that one day we're going to get to the point that people are as passionate about where their food come from, not only from land, but also from the ocean. And
Yes.
yeah.
And I, being on this bandwagon myself for over 25 years,
Yeah.
I would like to say that. But the reason I've now headed my podcast, Integration with Business, is because I have observed that nothing has changed in that 25 years. Despite what you're saying about the free range, I would say the conditions for chickens haven't really changed in 25 years. And that my observation is that unless it makes money and unless it's cheap enough at the price point for the buyer, neither of them are going to change. So unless you make something else, which is why I got into the carbon market, was trying to get the farmer paid enough from their nurturing of the soil that they could subsidise their own process of looking after the land and their animal welfare, because they are driven by money. And everybody is driven by money. The operation of a business is the survival of the business. So you can have all the altruistic things you want. I'm all about nutrition and health. And I just doesn't even come on the radar. Nobody is vaguely concerned about nutrition. You and I might be, but the business end, the pointy end of where it's actually happening, with the rubber hits the road, whether it's government or big business or even small business who can't compete unless they've got this tiny little elite family business market, it isn't changing across all of those areas, all of those sectors. So you have an opportunity, as I see it, in the genetics area to be looking at, because you can grow fish up to a point in a monoculture successfully. You are completely monitoring their food intake. And a lot of people don't realize people eat fish usually eat it for nutritional reasons, like omega oils, if they like fish or not. They think, oh, I'm eating it for my omega-3s. And the reality is that the fish don't produce, they're not naturally got omega-3 in them. It's what they eat that determines how much omega-3 in it. And it can be hugely different from 2,000 IUs to almost zero based on whatever the fish are being fed. So whether that's in under your certification label, I don't know. And I'd be curious to hear your viewpoint on it, because I think you were running a label called Little Tuna. Is that right? That was the name of the company you were?
No,
I don't know.
It's my colleague. She works for Little Tuna. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe you could talk a little bit about other species than just barramundi from the point of view of what works in this area for people that are looking, whether it's wild caught or farmed, or, where are those nutritional points of difference, whether it's certified, like what does that certification mean?
Yeah, again, I'm a fish geneticist, not a fish nutritionist, but I do know for a fact that what we've been trying to do is that in the last 50 years, the aquaculture industry has increased hugely, and we are trying to move towards a more sustainable way of feeding our aquaculture farmed fish. And of course, that means trying to find alternative diets that do not imply taking the fish from the ocean to feed our fish in the farms, because it doesn't obviously respond to the sustainability issues that we want to address. So one of the things that aquaculture has been doing is obviously investing a lot of energy and money and research into their nutrition and finding alternative ways to still have those nutritionist benefit that we obviously want to get from fish. So on that, one of the biggest thing is being the production of pellets, which is what animals are fed. If you think about the kibbles for dogs, that's exactly the same for fish. We develop diets that are extremely researched and designed for that particular species at that particular stage in life that will give them benefits both to the fish and to the person that will eat it. So those diets are not just thrown together for whatever fish, whatever it's Atlantic salmon, barramundi, or crustaceans. They all specifically designed, and there are hundreds and hundreds of scientists that works on that space, and it's a fantastic business if anyone wants to, invest into understanding the nutrition. Now, how do we get those beneficials, DHA and other omega-3s? Well, if we don't want to get it from the wild caught, there are still other ways to get it. So the first is that most of the time we actually utilize bioproducts or product that perhaps are not used for human consumption from the wild caught. Let's think about the backbone, the gills, the guts, the head of the fish. All these products that will be thrown away, otherwise they get used to produce actually diets and pellets. So that's where you can get that omega-3 still from those bioproducts of the wild caught.
Are they testing all that stuff when they make the pellet? I know very little about
Oh, absolutely.
I know about pellets, but how they're testing the nutritional level that's in the fish when they eat them.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything gets counted to the point. Like I could grab my PhD thesis up there on the shelf and show you like proteins, lipids, whatever vitamins it's added in there. It's all on a very calculated percentage and tested as well on the fish before being given. Another thing that I would like to touch on.
I was just going to ask what I thought about it was when they feed the pellets, they throw them into the net. How do they determine how much each fish gets?
Yeah,
different to like a cow and a trough.
It's very interesting, isn't it? So I think that's where AI is becoming so incredible, because at this point, when you and I find it like that's a little drop for Evoke as well. So we've been talking about AI so much at Evoke and how much is important. Well, aquaculture has been using AI since many years, because I remember as a PhD student in 2022, I would go into farms and they would have already those initial monitoring and AI boosted. Now, I'm not certain what kind of AI, but I know that they were monitoring and controlling everything automatically for the feed. So they are able to count how many little pellet each fish is eating.
Really?
So then,
wow.
Yeah. So then, well, on average, of course, and that's the same with cow. You can't count how many kilo probably or how many little leaf each one has eaten, but on an average, they're able to understand what is the perfect amount. So they also don't waste money, because they want to make money, and feed is probably the most expensive thing in aquaculture. So they don't waste money, and at the same time, they don't leave that feed in the water unused. But I wanted to touch on the omega-3. So another thing, for example, that I think it's very important is to think about research. Now, there are so many, as I said, exciting projects also trying to find alternative for omega-3. So instead of grabbing it and taking it and relying on the fish itself, so feeding fish to get that omega-3, now, for example, they're extracting it from algae and seaweed. So we are currently trying to find alternatives so we can become more and more sustainable.
I thought that's what the food was made for, because I know that's where the fish get it from, is from seaweeds, and I would have thought that was an algae. So I would have thought that's where they did get them from.
Yeah, well, you can get it from there as well, but I think it's a chain, right? So the little fish have a X amount of omega-3, then the big fish eats the little fish, therefore accumulates even more, and then it goes up the chain. So obviously, like the extract from the algae and from the seaweed, it might be much smaller compared to like a bigger fish that has it so much already in the system. So yeah, and also the way of extracting and the way that it's available. Now, I don't know exactly the specific, because again, I'm not a diet and nutritional specialist, but definitely know that there is that chain of accumulation of the omega-3.
So I heard you mention, and I think you should touch on that as well in here, wanting to dispel myths about what was being fed to the fish, that they were being fed offal and waste products that probably shouldn't be going into fish, because I'd heard, chicken waste and various things that you wouldn't want going into the ocean and you wouldn't want to go into your fish. So really what you've
I'm not
touched on.
sure I
Yeah,
mentioned chicken waste.
no, you didn't. I'm
Oh,
saying
oh, okay.
I've heard that.
Yeah, okay.
I've heard that. So I'm saying you mentioned you wanted to dispel myths being out there about what was in the fish food, and so I suppose I think it's worth mentioning that, because of what you just said, that the cost involved in that, why that is such a big factor, and how it affects the whole system, and why it costs as much as it does when it hits your table.
Yeah, well, if we want to have great products, we need to feed them great products. So I think, like, obviously in countries where they might not,
Don't
they
have the
do care.
market. They don't
I'm
have the
sorry.
economic market. Yeah, no, I
That
agree.
is, every farmer cares about their fish, because if their fish is not healthy, they will not make money. So every farmer care. But in country where perhaps they don't have the
The
opportunities
margins.
and their margins to really invest into feed that are pro, then uh, it's not their fault, but you're not going to have a pro product, if it makes sense. So I don't know. I have a dog. I could feed him what I found, the cheapest kibbles. I know that if I want my dog to be healthy, I feed him well. Same for myself. If I want my body to be healthy, I feed myself well. So that's where, if you want to invest into a good feed for your animal, because you want a high product and you want high profitability, there is that cost
Yeah,
that comes with it.
it's an interesting topic to think about, because in agriculture and aquaculture, the turnover for the animal that's grown for food is much. Let's say we're talking about a dog. I mean, my last dog lived 17 years, and I was wondering when she was going to finally cark it. It was like, this is crazy. This animal's living so long past its natural lifespan because of the quality of food that I was feeding it. And it's really, at the end of the day, an economics margin between, a young thing can live pretty long time often on a mediocre diet, compared to an older animal, which, it won't develop the diseases, is really what I'm trying to say, because it's
Mm.
got the robustness of earth and of its youth, and need to reproduce itself. So there's probably an economic trade-off in that space, where they're wanting them healthy, but they don't have to have it live that long, compared
Yeah.
to like your dog, which is what you're saying, going to be a
Yeah,
family
yeah, yeah,
member,
yeah, for
and you're
sure.
watching it closely and
Yeah.
passionately. So it's a bit of a different thing. I think people do struggle with all of those ethics in that space, but people like yourself and people in the industry are concerned with it, because there are other things that happen rather than just the health of the animal, from what I understand, in fish too. Some industries, like let me see, I think it was shrimp or prawns, which are mainly up in Thailand. I'm not sure where they're mainly grown,
Yeah,
but
we grow it here too, but
you do
yeah.
them.
Yeah, we
And
farm prawn here as well.
yeah, so I don't know about them being grown here, but I know that in some of those countries, I think they feed them, could be tilapia, but their death rate is massive, like 90% die due to diseases because of the crowding, and it's extraordinary how many live and die in their
Mm,
in their process. So I mean, that's a pretty hard economics when you're looking at
yeah,
90% die off
not a
in
good
your
profitability.
not
That's
good
for
profitability.
sure.
So
And
I
that's
would
what I
think that's
mean.
really
And
strongly driving the information, like for people from yourself, the science.
yeah, absolutely. And that's what I mean. Like, farmers, scientists, researchers, we all want these animals to be healthy and to be thriving, because otherwise we don't make money. Like,
Yeah.
it's you need to look after them. You need to give them the best life for that short amount of time or longer amount of time, dependent to the animals, that how long you're
Mm.
farming for. But like, you need to give them the best opportunities, because if you get a 90% mortality, you ain't making much money.
Exactly. So in your view, what do you think is the key thing that people are not, when you just talk to general public, what do you think is the key thing that people are not understanding or have a misinformation about when it comes to farmed fish, or even that it is farmed? What's your viewpoint when you talk to general public and they find out what you do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think is a misconception and the assumption that just because it's farmed is bad. And like, I think that, there are, and the fact that for some reason, seafood is the last commodity that we pretend to be from the wild.
Yeah.
There's no other commodity that we pretended to be from the wild because we like the fact that comes from the big ocean. And I think it's important that we keep fishing. It's important that we keep a sustainable wild caught industry. However, we can't feed a third of the global population just on wild caught. And that's where aquaculture become extremely important. And I also think another massive misconception is that farmers and researchers don't care about their animals. Again, they care. They care so much. And there are so many scientists, researchers, investors out there that are trying their best to really try to boost this industry, make it more profitable, sustainable, and thriving. And give it grace. It's a 50 years industry. Like, as at Evoke, they talked about we are lucky because the green revolution has already happened. We're now going through the blue revolution. And what we can do is that we can learn from the green revolution, make it better, but also we are a 50 years industry pretty much. Well, we've been there for a long time, but we have extremely expanded, becoming the fastest growing food sector in the last 50 years. So obviously we need to learn, and we will make mistakes throughout the learning curve as any other industry did in the past. But we are lucky.
I think that people don't really understand how big that is. I tried reviewing the numbers around what that is numerically, that growth, because the growth is massive very, very recently, really, isn't it, in the farmed fish area?
Absolutely.
But I have no stats on it at all.
Yeah, so I think it was 2000. I can't remember the exact date, but we are now producing more fish than what is caught. So aquaculture is now producing more fish than what we are taking from the ocean, which I think it's a massive, massive concept and a massive thing for the aquaculture industry that, brings in all these other point of view that needs to be taken into consideration. What I can say is that I did go to China. I was lecturing in a university in China. It was an extremely incredible experience. I loved every bit of it. And I came out so surprised on the technology and the incredible farm beautiful welfare that I've seen. I didn't go to many farms, but the one where I've been to, it was incredible. The technology was fantastic. It was so monitored. It was recirculating aquaculture, which means it was inland with water that recirculates. So it was all enclosed. It was not out at sea. And I was so surprised. It was a fantastic industry, the one that I've seen, of course.
Well, the Chinese are known for being incredibly advanced. When they want to do something, they do it faster than anybody else and do it with incredible technology. So that would make sense that you were seeing that. I'm sure they're capable. I had a different experience because I was just talking to people on the ground themselves, like locals. So I didn't really have any real data or knowledge sets at all. It was all, what do you call that? Gossip.
Gossip.
I don't know how else to call it. Yes, no. So, but, particularly when you're trying to actually glean on the ground what's officially reported and what's really actually occurring, it's really difficult to work out what's happening. It's kind of like, because you're always going to have incredibly good, because there'll be the market that'll pay for it. So I was just looking up. I happen to like Ora King salmon from Queensland, from New Zealand, because I know, because the person I interviewed had done the testing on there and knew what the nutritional status was. And I just looked up, I wonder if they went into, I knew they were selling, a lot of the time we can't get it here in Melbourne because they get more for it in America, which is a huge market. And so we go through like, let's say, seasonal availability to it based on who's buying or whatever.
Yeah.
And I found it was all the way over because I was going to go over to the Middle East, and I was like, I wonder if they've got it over there. Of course they do, because there's so much money over there in parts that you can pretty much get anything. So it's always interesting to sort of see how far reaching, how small or big the market is, because it's really always driven by money. Like, I have no idea what it costs over there because it's a huge distance it's traveling.
Yeah.
Compared to from here to Melbourne, a 3-hour flight. But yeah, just kind of trying to track it and understand what it's growing at, how much it's developing. So you would say in the time you've been in the industry that in your own experience, your own direct experience, that the aquaculture capacity, cleanliness, technology, etc., has improved. You've seen it improving, and it's
absolutely
quality results from doing that.
Absolutely. And I strongly believe as well in the potential of genetics and genomics. At the end of the day, like we are able to do so many things through selective breeding, trying, to reduce their FCR, so food conversion ratio. So then we need to feed less and the fish still grows enough, and having like better fish, better quality overall, in general. So I really think that genetics has a huge potential in this, but at the same time, there are so many other aspects, like let's think about antibiotic alternatives, or studies around biosecurity. All these things for sure have improved in the last, 12 years that I've been in the industry, for sure.
What was that word you used? STR?
FCR, so it's food conversion ratio. Food
conversion ratio. Okay.
Food. So like
FCR.
Yeah, FCR. So is with 1 kilo of feed, how many kilos do I get of fillet?
Okay.
Yeah.
And compared to how much I feed it. Yep,
yeah.
Understand.
So when we think about cows, I think that is around maybe 7, the food conversion ratio. When we think about salmon is 1.2. So that's where you know that you are actually eating something that is sustainable compared to other food, because you don't need to feed these animals as much or give them as much, food to produce that amount of fillet and meat and protein. So obviously it's a good way to think about it. And I think that fish in this way are very, very efficient. It's an efficient.
Can I ask, just like, so I happen to be looking at it and being like astounded, what is the protein content of a fish? Because I was kind of amazed that an egg or a piece of steak, let's say a 200-gram or 220-gram piece of steak, which you'd buy in a restaurant, was only like 50 or 60 grams of protein. Like, I just had never considered the protein ratio to the weight. So, I mean, people eat a piece of fish that's about 180 grams. I don't know what people averagely eat, but what is the protein in that?
Yeah, it would depend from
species
to species. Like we farm 620 different species of seafood. I think it would just really depend. 25 grams of protein per 100 grams of serving. So 20.
Most of us don't want to read all that stuff. We just want to know which one do we buy, which one's good. I mean, that's why I was asking about the little tuna. I didn't even know there was a specific tuna that was a better sustainable fish to be eating in Australia of tuna. Like, I don't know which tuna you should eat. I don't really even eat that much tuna. But if I was eating canned tuna, you'd be recommending a particular brand, I would assume. Is that correct?
I definitely eat little tuna. I love it, but that's because I know that it is certified sustainable. I know that it comes from a small business, and I want to support Australian-owned and Australian-operated seafood.
So is little tuna available on most supermarket shelves?
I find it at IGA, yes, but I actually directly buy it from the website.
Oh, it's really interesting. I mean, I don't eat tuna, really never buy a can.
Yeah.
What would I would buy whatever's in olive oil is my go-to. So
yeah. I love it. I eat probably 1 can of tuna a day, maybe. I know
a day.
Yeah,
You are a
I'm pretty
major tuna.
keen. Yeah.
All wild caught, or is it farmed? I don't know anything about it. I thought they had to be the big fish. I'm always amazed how big they are. And they swim really fast. They are really, really big muscles, but that may be a particular type of tuna. I don't know.
Yeah. So look, again, I'm not wild caught. I'm not specialized in tuna. However, what I find very interesting is that we still have enclosed the life cycle of tuna, bluefin tuna in particular. Closing the life cycle meaning having broodstock and being able to consistently produce offspring to then have an aquaculture system. Thousands of money have been invested, but
In tuna.
but still we don't have a life cycle closed. So we're still relying on wild caught fish.
Oh, we do.
However, in South Australia, what they do is that they get the fish from the wild and they put it in aquaculture facilities and then they grow them and then sell them. So that's where there is the aquaculture of tuna. But the life cycle is not being closed.
How do you keep a wild caught tuna, which is such a massive fish, in a small space?
They're very big spaces.
They're very big spaces.
They're very big spaces.
God, those nets must be like
Yeah.
kilometres long.
They're huge. They're huge.
They're
And even like
huge.
when we think about like the farms, like what we see is the top. But when we look on the depth on how long these pens are, they are huge. They're big. That like I think that people forget that, is not only a 1D dimension, is a 3D dimension, and there is that big depth, which makes the pen, of course, it's not ocean, but there is that depth where the fish can go up and down and around on the surface, on the bottom. So it's not just that circle that you see on the top.
And I suppose most people, the only fish farm I've ever seen as a tourist would be, up in the mountains going to freshwater trout fishing, where they're jumping out of the pens. I assume that would be the majority of anybody who's seen fish farming would be that sort of thing as a kid, or
Yeah.
something for an outing the family does or something like that. But I know they also farm oysters in containers, and they farm shrimp, and they farm barramundi and
Barramundi,
salmon.
mussels. As I say, I think it was 630 last time I checked. Every year changes a little bit because we start closing more and more life cycles, but that's a lot of different type of seafood that we farm.
And fish foods and different
And
diets that you have to create.
Exactly. Imagine that for each of them, you need different diet, different environment, understanding the behavior, understanding where and how you can farm them the best way possible. And then when we talk about genetics, it becomes even more complicated because for each of them, you need to create genetic tools, to understand the pedigree or know the origin and all these kind of things. Like it's quite interesting and it's quite elaborated, and that's why it's such a buzzing and exciting, I think, industry to work in, because there is so much that we can do and discover and make it better and more sustainable, more profitable and thriving.
And so when you say 630 different species, is that globally, or are you saying in Australia as well?
No, globally.
I wouldn't have thought we did more than 2 or 3 here. I just don't know. But how many species do we do in Australia? Farmed?
I think there are quite a few, because I think when we think about it, there are lots of emerging industry as well. So for example, grouper. That's a fish that perhaps we did not know, not many people know, but there are now some industries that are trying to invest into closing the cycle of grouper, which they have, and so there are all these kind of fish that perhaps they are emerging and they're very exciting, but they're not well known by the consumers as well. So
do you feel the consumers should be more educated as to what's wild and what's farmed and the sustainability of it in, let's say, whatever they're shopping? So how can they, let's say they go to a fishmonger. I would have assumed everything was wild caught if I went to a fishmonger, but quite likely it's not. Is that correct? I don't know.
Okay, so a fish market. Yeah.
Fish market.
How do they know? They will need to ask most of the time.
Yeah, so even all of that fish, some of it could be farmed.
Yeah. A fish market, yes. I was in Melbourne. I went to the Victoria markets, loved it, buzzing with people, so many fish. It was very exciting to see. Definitely would think that some of that 100% was farmed, not all wild caught.
And how can a punter know that other than asking? Because I would say some of the people wouldn't know behind the retailers.
Yeah. Look, I look back in Europe, and in Europe, I think they have a great thing called labeling that is mandatory. And they say, what is the species? Where was caught? Or where was farmed? How was it caught? And in case how was it caught, it tells you if it was line caught, if it was net or whatever. How was it farmed? Was it offshore? Was it inshore? Was recirculating aquaculture? It's in a label.
And tell me, how does that affect the industry? Because one could say, I assume, is to lobby government to have that in Australia. I think some are. I know that David, who I've spoken to, had lobbied for 12 years to get place of origin, which is on frozen fish in the supermarket, have that on restaurant menus. But in Europe, you say it's already in. How much does it affect people shopping?
I have left Europe 9 years ago. I just know that most probably people are going to be able to make more informed decision. However, how it affect the industry, it will definitely affect it because more and more regulation are put in place. Therefore, it's always like finding a right balance. I definitely love to see in the shelves in Italy when I go and visit, and seeing like that I can actually point it down to the scientific name of the fish, and be able to know that was caught at that latitude in that place. But I do also think that is a nightmare on a point of view of bureaucracy and regulation, and for the industry, probably the implementation of that was a big process. So I'm not saying that we need to copy exactly that in Australia. Yeah.
I suppose I'm more asking, has it driven the price up? Because I would think most people shopping for fish. I know I grew up with fish. In South Australia, we always had whiting. Now, whiting used to be like the cheap fish you could get in the fish and chip shop. Now, it's probably one of the most expensive fish to buy, certainly for a fish and chip shop. And I wonder, has it affected the Italian, when you go to buy a piece of fish in Italy, is it a lot more expensive now with all that bureaucratic labeling? Like, is the cheapest fish, still shark or whatever it is I'm asking because what was your experience buying a piece of fish?
Yeah, I would say that like everything, price has gone up since I was 20. So I would not know if that is driven by an economic issue or by the fact that now the industry is very regulated in that point of view. What I do know is that more and more I can have conversation with people and empowers the consumers to decide what they want to support if they want to make that choice. Look, and decide exactly where the food come from, and if they want to support Italian fishers and farmers, they are able to do that, which is fantastic. That soon, from July this year, we as Australian are going to be able to do the same because of the country of origin.
No, that's great. That's at the fishmonger point, but it's not in restaurants. Is that correct?
No, it's coming in July. Is going to be on the in the restaurants and
on the menu. Has to be a label on the menu.
Yes. Yeah.
That's great. I hope that really does help the wild. I know that's something that the wild caught people have been pushing for a long time. So I'll be really interested to see what it does, because I know that the biggest issue with it has been cost, because a lot of the frozen stuff is unregulated, so it's obviously a lot cheaper. Something like still 70% of the market. So I'm interested to see, because cost of living is really going up, taxing on people has really made it very hard for people, to survive. And so whether that is going to help or hinder the industry, I'm curious to know, because it'll still come down to costs and, whether people can afford it. Or maybe they'll do like we used to do. A chicken used to be a bit like having a turkey. You'd have it once for a celebratory thing rather than every meal. So maybe we'll start to look at protein more from the point of view of it being special rather than just take it for granted.
Initially, we eat it, I think, once or twice a week.
Protein. Yeah.
Rest is, fibers and veggies and things, which I think, Mediterranean food, it's pretty healthy as well. So,
Yeah.
but
Even
saying
though
that,
you eat a can of tuna a day.
I tuna all the time and I love it and it's delicious. So there you go.
No, that's great. Is there anything we haven't covered in your field of expertise that you would like to touch on? We didn't cover what I thought was interesting. I met also the executive EO of the Australian Women's Association in Seafood. Is that right? I don't
Yes,
know how you say it.
woman in seafood Australasia. Yeah, absolutely.
Women in Seafood Australasia. So it has Asia as well, all of Asia.
Australasia. So at the moment, we probably would say that we have we do have some contacts, but we are slowly expanding. So our next point, it's New Zealand. So at the moment is mainly Australia and New Zealand, but the vision is definitely to include the Australasia region within
Well,
our
huge
programs.
market. So, and
Yeah.
what are the key things that the women in seafood do?
Yeah.
What
So
is the aims of the goal of the association?
Yeah, so Women in Seafood is a non-for-profit organization, which its aim is to raise the visibility of women within the industry. So when we think about women and the seafood industry in general, only 30% of the workforce are women. So it's definitely a very much male-dominated industry. And when we look at the percentage of women in leadership, only 15% are actually women. So the idea when Woman in Seafood was first born, it was actually in South Australia many, many years ago when 3 women decided that they wanted their voices and their ideas to be heard and they wanted to really have an impact within the industry. And so that's when they started meeting and supporting each other. Now, Women in Seafood, we are now, I think, around 400 members, so 400 ladies, and we deliver leadership and professional and personal development opportunities for our members. That's thankful to a government grant that we received a few years ago and through Turn the Tide, which is a big project that we've been delivering for the last 3 years. What do we do? Well, women in the seafood are everywhere. We are from research to farmers to chefs and processing. So we are, and fishers, of course. So we are everywhere, but the numbers is obviously lower than in other industries. And what it means is that sometimes we can feel quite isolated, especially if we work in rural, remote areas. We might be out at sea for a long period of time and be the only woman on the boat, and all these things means that often, we have that feeling of isolation. And therefore having an organization like Women in Seafood really, personally for me, boosted my career in a other level because of networking and the opportunities that I was even aware because of Women in Seafood. The
That's
newsletter that we
wonderful.
send every month. So every month we send newsletter with all the opportunities, grants, awards that are around. But and then we deliver all these awesome programs, which I've been part of.
And what do you feel is the key thing that more women coming into the industry is doing to help change the industry? I'm interested to see, what is the influence? Is there more caring,
Yeah,
more awareness of the ocean? I mean, what is the things that they're
yeah.
particularly passionate about?
I think that a big thing that we talk about quite often is a social licensing. So often women have a role, not a role, but like a natural tendency to create trust between the industry and the community. Like women often know how to talk about the industry and have that capacity to really build that trust. And I think that, sometimes we underestimate the incredible power in storytelling and in explaining the industry to the community, and the impact that that can have in the industry itself. So I think that a thriving industry, it's an industry that is inclusive and diverse, because when we think about it, there are so many studies that showcase that diverse leadership and diverse community in companies are more resilient, more competitive, more creative and innovative. So I think that bringing that diversity within the industry, whatever is gender or ethnicity, language, or point of views, it always going to bring more of a
I'm
positive
curious if
tone.
I really respect that. And I know that there's a massive, in agriculture, there's a massive network of women in agriculture.
Yeah.
Like certainly nationally,
Yeah.
I forget what its short term form is, but,
Iowa.
but because they actually, I think women are still primarily the people that shop and buy the food. And the more they're educated as to what that food is for the health of their family, the more they're going to make those choices, even if it means, well, I'll cut back on this and I'll buy more of this in my budget, that those bodies like you're talking can frame it in a way that means something to that person. Because I think that perhaps even with this podcast, I may be too geared towards the money for the average person to go, well, I'm not looking at it from that point of view. And I was really pleased to hear of a women's network there, because I do think it is the shopping dollar that is the critical point, and the decisions around those shopping dollars. I mean, it's a finite budget that they're working with. And, I'm always amazed what a woman can do shopping at a supermarket, fill a trolley with food for a week for 4 or 5 people out of
Absolutely.
ridiculously small amounts of money. And I go, I wonder how they make those choices. So knowing, let's say, that you could buy a farmed fish that had the nutrient level of, let's say, a wild caught in some industries, and let's say it was frozen because that was cheaper, and that it still had the nutritional impact, and they could make, those informed choices through bodies like yours that maybe can, because like they do that with a thing in agriculture called, in the organic sector, but it's, I think it's called the Dirty Dozen, which is actually 12 or 15 items, which, because of the nature of the plant, and they're grown in, like strawberries and very fine leafy greens and things like that we eat quite prolifically, have actually got the worst amount of poisons and toxins on them. So that if you had 50 items you're shopping for, and you had to choose between conventional with sprays or organic without, choose, a bunch of spinach or a rocket leaf that's organic, because the chemicals used on those light leaves are so bad, like so toxic. I heard one podcast saying strawberries, I've got so much pesticide they can actually be mulched up and used as pesticide, because they've got so much spray on them. And having eaten organic strawberries for years, I just don't eat strawberries generally, because the strawberries organically, to get them from A to B in shipping, have to be a species that's so hard that for me, I'd rather not eat them if I can't grow them or something. It's just like, oh, that's a fruit I'll just omit. So I think as a mother, that's a choice that I'm making, and that I'm weighing up. So I'd be very interested to see it as a shopper for family nutrition thing, that those points of difference, which you, as someone in the agriculture industry, can clearly verify and say, this is a really healthy fish for you. This is well worth doing. It's sustainable. Maybe it costs this much more or a little bit more, or like there's an economics thing in there close to your locale, so it doesn't have the transport, whatever it is, that would be something I think that would be really readily taken on by women globally that are
Absolutely.
shopping for their families.
Absolutely. And I strongly believe in that. And I strongly believe on the importance of educating and having, I think there was a groundbreaker this year at Evoke that said having translators that translate what we do in our industry for the consumers. And I think that's so important. And whatever that is, by, I don't know, creating a podcasts all about, you know, sustainable seafood and talking about it, or whatever is writing a cookbook that explain what fish to go and get, or having a
That's what
TV
chefs
show.
do. Chefs do a
Yeah,
great job
you
at that because
know,
they're so
and
entertaining to watch. Yeah.
exactly, or have a TV show, or simply talking to the public and you know, building that trust. I think that that's the soul, and that's something that we really need to do, and we really need to get better at doing, and building that story and building that trust and building that um empowerment for the consumers to be able to, you know, decide what they want to eat and decide that that is a sustainable protein, and I support it.
Wonderful. Well, look, I think that's pretty well touched on everything, unless there's something else you want to add to. This has been a great discussion.
No,
And if there's anything else you want to add to it,
I'm just
I'll.
going to add that, yeah, my children's book is going to be out, I think, at the end of this year, which is very exciting.
Woo!
It's all about the ocean, and it's called The Ocean, My Best Friend, The Ocean. So,
Will that be on Amazon or just directly from a publisher or just you? But
yeah,
like,
no. At the moment, it is getting produced by Il Castello, which is an Italian publishing house, but it's going to be both in English, Spanish, German, and Italian. So I will keep you all posted on what library you can get it from.
and do you have an Instagram or a social media that I can put the links below the shows to where they can follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So
Okay, we'll send them through to me and I'll
yeah,
add them in.
fantastic.
And it's been lovely having you on the podcast.
Yeah,
And
I
good luck with
really,
your book.
yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. It's been lovely to chat with you, Samantha.
I'm sure we'll run into each other again in the agriculture and aquaculture traversing around as we do.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Fantastic.
sweetheart. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Integration, where we explore the strategies that connect heart, land, and capital. If today's episode sparks something in you, share it forward. Until next time, stay curious and keep building the world you believe in.